Hi, it's Katrina Sargent, owner and creator of Devil Doll Custom Creation. Today we're going to be doing a Milky Way epoxy tumbler tutorial. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. You're going to want to start out with a prepped and painted solid white tumbler, and then I add my base color paints. Here are my two, and then I do a metallic rose gold. This is a spray paint shelter. I will link it in the description. I don't want any paint getting inside my tumbler, so what I do is I cut out the bottom of these coffee cups and it slides right in the tumbler, and then you take your arm with your football, pool noodle, whatever you use, and then put it down inside. So it's easy to work with, plus you don't get any paint inside you're having to clean up later. So I start with my metallic first. So what I'm gonna do is I kind of go at an angle and rotate my tumbler as I spray paint small little squirts. You don't wanna do too heavy-handed because your paint can drip. Once I kind of am happy with how that swirl is looking, I grab my next color and I go next to the rose gold the exact same way. Small squirts. I like to see a start and an end of a swirl on one side. That just is how I like my swirls. You don't have to do that. You can do whichever way you prefer. And then I just go back through on the colors and re-add a little bit more heavy-handed on the second coat, but remember to watch out for drips. You're going to be covering this with glitter. This is just to kind of get a base color for your glitter so you don't have to do multiple coats. Let your tumbler dry fully before you move on to your glitters. I am using epoxy method. You can do Mod Podge if you want. It will just be slightly different. My tumbler, I heat up with a heat gun, so the epoxy goes on really smooth and thin. When you're using epoxy method, you need to make sure you're doing super thin coat. If you do too heavy of a coat of epoxy, your glitter can shift, or it gives you like a wet look and your glitter kind of soaks up that epoxy. You don't want that. You want it just to be the glue. So I used barely anything on my gloved hand, and you're going to want to just make sure you have the entire tumbler coated, including the bottom, around the rim, around the bottom edge. You don't want any heavy streaks also that can show up on finer cut glitters. Moving on to glitters, I have parchment paper under me. I use my chunkiest glitter first. I kind of just sprinkle it lightly on that rose gold metallic spray paint. This is just giving you kind of a map where you're going to put the rest of your glitters. Once I'm happy with it, I kind of go a little bit more heavy-handed in the middle of that and kind of let it cascade both directions to give it more of that ombre on each side. But where I want it to be the heaviest is right in that middle area, because I don't want any other glitter coming on here and sticking to the epoxy that I want this solid rose gold color. I normally go back and forth between a chunky or bigger cut glitter with a fine cut. applying it the same way. So I want that middle band to be the heaviest glitter, and then I let the glitter kind of cascade onto the next color choice. This kind of gives it a nice blend between their colors. Here I am actually skipping where I'm going to be putting my ultra fine pink glitter. I will do that very last because I want it to fill in the gaps where I kind of leave open here. And as you can tell, I am not tapping off my tumbler after I glitter each color. I let whatever is going to fall off when I'm glittering onto the parchment paper, I let it fall off. Then I put that back in the container. I will show you what I do after to get any extra that's on the tumbler. If you tap it now, you're going to have all kinds of colors come off. So I do that towards the end. Right here, I am now going to tap off my tumbler on this parchment paper and then set that one off to the side, grab a different paper for my next glitter color. I'm going to go back and forth a couple times with this page, so I don't throw it away, I hold on to it. This just helps, so before you move on to your lightest color, you are not going to have tons of glitter fall off, so you can save whatever doesn't stick to the epoxy. Just do a quick look, make sure you don't see any wet looks. That means the glitter has soaked up the epoxy and you need to keep glittering until you no longer see the wet look. If your epoxy is too thick, make sure everything is 100% covered in glitter where you want it. Since we did kind of a light coat on the first one, I go over a second time just to fill in any little gaps that might be there to help blend the colors a little better, things like that. See, I only tap off my tumbler over the mixed page before I move on to the next color. Now, if you're happy with it, I take a piece of wax paper or parchment paper, and then you're going to roll your tumbler in that paper. You need to try to kind of lay that glitter flat, especially the chunky glitter. You don't want to rub it. You want to just kind of add pressure to it. If you rub it, you will rub the glitter and move the glitter. This will help you in the long run from having to do a lot of coats of epoxy. Then I take my nail and I run it along the top edge to get any chunky glitter, especially, off that edge. So when you're doing your rims later, it just kind of helps. So you're not going to be taking off any color on any glitter that is there. I also check the bottom to make sure I don't have any chunky glitter on the bottom. I only do finer cut of glitter on the bottom. I never add chunkies to the bottom. That sometimes is a leveling problem later if you allow that. Once your glitters are laid flat, you're going to let your epoxy dry fully. And then I add quick coat. You can do Rust-o-oleum clear spray paint, you can do triple thick, you can do anything you want. You just want to make sure these glitters are going to stay there and not move when you add your epoxy. And over the chunkies that sometimes expel epoxy. This is going to have the micas on top, so it's not extremely critical to keep them all separate, but since quick coat or the spray paint seal them in pretty well, they don't usually shift very much. So then I'm moving on to my CCDIY artist resin. I have my gloves, my respirator on. I did 20 mLs of each part. This is over raw glitter, so I do heavy-handed this first layer. I won't do that heavy-handed in the future layers. This is just to cover up the glitter and not have any lumps and bumps. But since we use that wax paper to kind of lay everything flat, you don't really have any of those issues. So I run my hands along my tumbler to make sure everything is coated fully. Don't add too much pressure to your hands because that can create micro bubbles. Be careful with that. Depends on your epoxy. This is artist resin, so I'm not sure what everyone's using. Also, I use a heat gun after it's been turning for about 15 minutes, and I use a torch about 15 minutes after that. Your epoxy might not be able to handle that kind of heat. You need to know your epoxy and do what's right for it. So after this has been sanded and washed with Dawn dish soap, I'm going to move on to the mica step. I do a very, very thin coat of epoxy on the tumbler. If you have too thick of a coat, your micas are going to roll. You're going to get that spiral look. If that's the one you're going for, leave it a little thicker. I don't like that. I like my micas to stay where I put them. So once I have a very thin coat of epoxy on my tumbler, I then divide it up within the little cups of each color of micas. I'm doing a gold, a rose gold, a pearl, which I add Alumilite dye because I want my white to be opaque, but I want it a little shimmer. And then the very end, I have like a peacock gold. This is just to add a little gold shimmer in certain places when you take it into the sun. So Illuminate dye, a little goes a long way. You only need very little dot in this amount of epoxy. You're going to want to have baby wipes on hand, easy to grab, because you're going to be going from color to color, wiping off your hand, wiping off your stick, things like that. Once I have everything mixed up, I use a gloved finger. Make sure it's clean with your baby wipe. And then what I do is I just tap my finger into the micas and then run it the length of my turner as it turns. You don't want to change direction once you start a direction. And then you're not going to want it to be 100% even, right? So you're going to want to kind of just do it sporadic wiping basically, and then you're going to pull up as the tumbler turns. I kind of just slather it on in certain places, and then I remove what I don't like in a minute. Remember, keep wiping off your hand from the baby wipe, or you're going to get like a mixed color. It might be beautiful, who knows? Now I just take my finger that's been cleaned off and run it the length of my tumbler. I'm wanting to kind of blend those colors together and to remove the majority of it because I don't want it to move. I want it to kind of flow together. But like I said, do not change direction. Don't stop middle of the tumbler. It will give you a different look also. Remember, you have time. If you need to add more color to a spot, add it. If you're using fast set, you have to move very, very fast. I would not recommend doing a fast set epoxy with this style because it will cure before you're ready for it to be done. But you can do it if that's your preference. The bottom, I just kind of dip my finger in a couple colors and tap it on the bottom. Then I let it roll. So it just kind of adds a color variation to the bottom as well. That gold peacock I was talking about, I usually take a silicone brush or something, and I'm just going to kind of thread it very small amounts, random places. This is just going to add a beautiful gold shimmer outside. You're not going to see a whole lot of it until it's in the sunlight. You are not going to add heat like a heat gun. This will make your micas move, but I do torch it very little to pop any micro bubbles that might have formed with you pulling your micas. This can cause the epoxy to rotate as well and have your micas shift. So do very little of it, if any at all. My epoxy is fully cured, and now I'm moving to sanding. I gotta sand the rim so you have a little stainless steel on the top so the epoxy adheres to the side of the cup, not the lip. I use a sanding block. I also have 220 grit sheet. If you take your sanding block, you can kind of angle it so you get that stainless steel lip. If you don't have a sanding block, you can use the sheet. Just make sure your hands are not going too far over the edge and taking off any color or glitter where you're not wanting to sand. And then sand the rest of your tumbler before your next coat of epoxy. Wash it with Dawn dish soap. Dry fully before you epoxy. So I actually added some more white micas on top of this. My camera didn't record it, so I am really sorry. I did the exact same thing I did in the previous with just white. Here it is after more white is added onto that second layer. It is gorgeous. I hope everyone enjoyed this tutorial. Please like, share, subscribe. It really means the world to me. Hit that bell notification so you're notified when I drop new videos. If you have any comments or questions, please write them in the comments. I will write back. I also have a Facebook group, facebook.com, Devil Doll Community. Thank you, everyone.